Contrary to popular belief, the only dysfunction of the ego is not limited to what we could refer to as grandiose narcissism. Most of the time, when we think of someone with a runaway ego, we tend to think of the extrovert personality type with overt boastfulness coupled with a deep-seated need for external validation and an extremely fragile sense of self hiding behind a facade of false bravado. On the other side of the ego dysfunction spectrum, however, we have what is referred to as the vulnerable or covert narcissist. The covert narcissist suffers from the egoic illusion of identifying who they are with their suffering, and that the anguish they experience is far worse and of a special type so that nobody else could ever hope to fully understand their personal pain. There are, in fact, many shades of egoic illusion one can perceive for her or himself. A healthy ego represents quite simply an awareness of the self as one thinks, feels, and acts in accordance with one's current understanding of reality. A healthy ego does not identify circumstances and events beyond one's control as being integral to their identity or sense of self. Success or failure involves many variables which simply cannot be controlled in life. An unhealthy ego will lead one to believe that either their identity is somehow integral to their success and they are deserving simply because of their sense of self and how great they are, or on the other extreme, one's failures and pain are just a self-fulfilling prophecy of their true identity. Both of these are completely delusional. Things happen to everyone, but the ego always interprets this as me. This is happening to me. Why is it happening to me? Just as the boastful and secretly insecure person identifies with an imagined egoic version of the self, so too may the most introspective and tormented person cling desperately to an equally delusional egoic narrative. Regardless of which direction the runaway ego takes, the individual allows their ego to take control because this is far easier than having to bear the burden of trying to navigate human existence in the most meaningful sense, since, let's be honest, it's not easy to do. If one wishes to rise above the egoic manipulations of our modern era, where social media and popular culture are fueled largely by the triggering of our base animal instincts, we must first acknowledge this powerful and hidden dynamic at play here. Look into this for yourself, and you will see this dynamic at play in the world absolutely everywhere. Silent Hill 3, with its emphasis on basic instinctual horror and the monsters which are really a disturbing artistic amalgam of Francis Bacon and Hieronymus Bosch, a la Masahiro Ito, confirms that we humans are the most monstrous creatures of them all, especially when we account for the mass manipulation and psychologizing of our primal instincts. The power that our lower animal nature has over our minds can be quite difficult or nearly impossible to decouple from the thought processes of the human intellect. In other words, we often come with a fair amount of psychological baggage within our sense of identity. So much so that many remain hopelessly convinced that the terrors which seem to have emerged from their own minds through the pathway of instinctual animal triggers must somehow be an integral part of their identity. The real horror, of course, is that Konami continued to make more games after Silent Hill 3. I will admit, though, I wasn't keen on doing this Silent Hill 3 series at first, but I've since changed my mind after what I've discovered after some sincere research. I may change my attitude about Silent Hill 4 as well, if there is reason to do so in the future. But as of this recording, I don't think there is very much to be learned from the rest of these games. All good stories like this one, which account for the hero's journey archetype, have very complex and well-developed characters. And when we're talking about Japanese storytelling, then deep emotion and compelling characters are almost always going to be the primary focus. And as a result, there are several highly symbolic and meaningful character archetypes which occur in parallel between Silent Hill and Silent Hill 3. But before we dive into the first character, we have to acknowledge that Silent Hill 3 quite closely resembles many of the events, symbolism, and character archetypes of the first game, and for a reason that you may not expect. Yes, it's a sequel to the first game, of course, but Silent Hill 3 was originally planned as a rail shooter. The reason I bring this up is because the time and budget wasted on the development of a Silent Hill 3 rail shooter of all things means less time and money for a fully developed Silent Hill 3 game. So what did Team Silent Hill do? They simply reshuffled the deck from the first game, combining many elements from the original Silent Hill. And this likely explains why Silent Hill 3 is a short game that tracks its predecessor so closely. However, Team Silent really did make the best out of a bad situation, I feel like. So in keeping with my first Silent Hill video series, we're going to start by taking a closer look at Douglas Cartland. Just like Sybil Bennett from the first game, Douglas has law enforcement experience as a former police detective turned private investigator. And just like before, character names are very important in Silent Hill games. The name Douglas has Scottish Gaelic origins and translates approximately to dweller by the dark stream. The surname Cartland lends even more confirmation, as it means land between the streams. Douglas indeed is dwelling between the streams of the normal and otherworld in Silent Hill 3. Like all police detectives, Douglas has a foot planted in two completely different realities. One being the normal world of everyday people just living their lives. In the other world, of course, lurking in the shadows, Douglas is in this place that's filled with danger and deceit. The oath of law enforcement is to protect the innocent and bring lawbreakers to justice. And Douglas must bear the burden of standing right between these two worlds, holding back the forces of evil from destroying the world he swore to protect. Just like the blessed prophet Sybil Bennett, who always seems to appear at the right time for Harry Mason, Heather simply could not hope to survive or progress any further in the story without Douglas. Douglas Cartland's own namesake infers that he is indeed a sort of ferryman on the River Styx, who helps Heather navigate the dark and dangerous underworld that she is being drawn into. To emphasize the amount of dangers these two are getting themselves into, as well as to ramp up the fear and emphasis on Douglas's relatable human nature, this hard-boiled detective admits to Heather that he is very much afraid. We are shown that even the ferryman himself, who has traversed the dark underworld countless times, is filled with confusion and doubt. From the very beginning and through the entire game, the elements of ambiguity, confusion, and fear will appear again and again to keep the characters and the player completely off balance and always on edge. Not to mention, Heather's first foray into the otherworld comes immediately after her first encounter with Douglas. This is highly symbolic as Mr. Cartland plays this archetypal role of the ferryman, ushering Heather along the dark stream